This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Mint Mobile. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Thursday, September 7th, 2023. And I have the awesome, the one and only Steve Litchfield here with me. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I am very well. My Mac, as we record this, is saying, do I want to apply updates now? No, I think we'll hold off for that while we record the podcast. I'm very well, thank you.
Very wise. So good to have you back. It's been quite a while since the last time I talked to you. You've semi-retired, but your podcast is still going strong, which is making me very happy. And most importantly, you have a device right now that I have not spent much time on the show. I have it as well. I've been so busy with things. I really haven't had a chance to dive deep into it. So it's really good to have you back. And let's talk about the Sony Xperia 1 Mark V.
Yes, I know you've got Patreon users who are video. So there we are. There's my Xperia 1 Mark V. Really enjoying it. Yeah, I've had it for about a month now over here. Yeah, and I've also got the 1 Mark IV for comparison, which is really useful, putting them side by side. Where do you want me to start? And
well, let's talk about, the camera is obviously what we want to talk about. I feel like Sony's phones have always been delightful in the sense that they have, all the features. They don't care about price. They're a niche product and they accept that. And as such, they give us everything. They give us wireless charging, a headphone jack, all these lovely things, a camera button, Steve, a camera button. How long has it been since, which phone still has a camera button? In a dual detent at that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the big change this year. This version is the 48 megapixel main sensor. We've gone from 12 megapixel large pixels to a larger sensor in terms of pixel count. And what's been your experience with that?
Well, in theory, this is the perfect smartphone. Imaging, functions, features. I have a couple of niggles. One non-camera niggle first, if I may. Sure. The 4K screen, which they've had for a couple of generations now, it's beautifully crisp. If my eyes were good enough, I'm sure I could see all 4K resolution, but I can't, in which case the only real effect is the fact that in the sunlight it's not as contrasty, it's not as clear outdoors, which is a real shame when it's a camera phone and you want to be taking photographs out in the sun in nice weather. It's not terrible, you can just about see what you're framing, but I do wish they put a 1080p screen or a QHD and have a more traditional technology that was just clearer, iPhone, Samsung style. The second glitch, really, the second complaint, is a minor petty Steve Litchfield gripe. It's nothing huge, but I do want Sony to address it, is that, as you're aware, Sony in the previous generations, they had a basic camera app, and then they had Photography Pro, and you had to choose which one. The Photography Pro had all the Sony Alpha-like user interface bits, and the basic app had the basic stuff. They've now put the basic interface within Photography Pro, which is great. The default is you take it out, you press the shutter button, you get the basic interface, a standard camera phone interface with a big shutter button. However, in that, you can only select saving to JPEG, not JPEG plus RAW. And that is important because, by default, the JPEGs all get edge enhanced and sharpened, just like on, Samsung or whatever. And it's a real shame. And I was really complaining about this. I thought, I'll just try the RAW. On the iPhone, I've got the iPhone 14 Pro Max here. I thought, well, Pro RAW, I love Pro RAW on that. Maybe the Sony does something similar. In Photography Pro, if you go into the Auto mode, which is the first of the DSLR Sony Alpha style interface modes, in Auto mode, there is the option of JPEG plus RAW. So selected that JPEG plus RAW. Look at the RAW images, perfect. Pure, no edge enhancement, no sharpening. I can use this, it's perfect. But in that alpha mode, that alpha interface, there's no shutter buttons. You have to use the mechanical shutter button, which means that if you're not very careful with the jolting of the force you apply with your finger, the phone gets jolted just very slightly. If you rotate the same interface, the same mode, the same app to portrait, all of a sudden, camera shutter button. So they clearly haven't done the work yet. You can get RAW shooting with an on-screen shutter button in the auto mode, But to go through all those hoops just to get vaguely close to what the iPhone can do just by tapping one icon on the screen, which is ProRAW. On the iPhone, just for your listeners, I think I mentioned this last time I was on the 12 Pro Max, I shoot in 12 megapixel, not 48, 12 megapixel, ProRAW, and I get images that are just as pure, just as beautiful, just as wonderful, just as natural as on my beloved Lumia 1020, etc., back in the day, and how photos should look. They haven't been messed around with. They haven't been edge enhanced. They haven't been sharpened. So Sony are so close here. Photography Pro just needs a few more 100,000 man-hours of development and work to put the shutter button in to give me JPEG plus RAW in the default basic mode, and then I'd be happy. Then I would at least have a chance. And if I was taking a nature scene, you in front of hedges and grass and trees, I could take it in that mode, and I know that all the leaves and everything wouldn't just be a blurry, fractalized green mess. They would actually look like grass and hedges and trees. So that's my complaint. They are minor in the grand scheme of things. I have sent you some photographs today. I don't know whether you got them.
I did see them. Yeah, I saw that. And also your article, which I will put in the show notes on your own blog about your thoughts. And, I think for me, what I was wondering about now that I've, kind of heard you say this is, do you still maintain any of the AI functionality in this auto mode versus basic? Because my understanding when I got briefed by Sony was that the basic mode this year has a lot more of what we expect computationally from a phone. If you're not going to try to be as picky as you and shoot RAW, but you're just going to mash the button and get a photo, which might not be the reason you buy this phone. So that's another discussion, right? But I'm just saying, if one of the things that Sony tried to remedy here is the idea that sometimes you just need to take a photo right now, and capturing the moment, like freezing the time, is critical. And for that, they don't really have anything until now. And so apparently they've done that, but you lose that in the auto mode.
From my tests, you don't. The auto mode, the auto mode and full auto of shooting JPEGs specifically, the results are identical. I went out and shot some of the test scenes I sent you were of the interior scenes at IKEA, and I took those in basic mode and also auto in full auto, and the results are identical. You have to turn on JPEG plus RAW, at which point the RAW images lose all the HDR. They lose the smarts. The RAW, literally, as you'd expect, just gives you a single exposure RAW image that you can do stuff with. The iPhone, again, without wishing to praise the iPhone too much, but the ProRAW on the iPhone gives you all the smarts, all the texture enhancement, and all the AI stuff you want without any of the actual populist edge enhancement and sharpening. Now on the iPhone, that's in ProRAW mode. If you turn ProRAW off, you get the standard Samsung, whatever.
Right.
Everything pops out of the screen artificially. And I hate that, because it's fine for shooting a pint of beer or a pizza or something, but you go out and you take the natural world and it's just a complete mess. So that's how I shoot ProRAW. And I really wish Sony would just take a few leaves out of Apple's book here.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I feel like, some people are doing it better than others in that sense, because I honestly feel that iPhone photos, and I'm not talking about ProRAW, I'm talking the regular photos people are shooting, I've gotten worse. Like, I feel like there was a time, maybe iPhone 8, iPhone 10, iPhone X, whatever you want to call it, like around like iPhone 7, they were so good. Even in default, they've just felt really well balanced. There wasn't a lot of that artificialness, I think, comes from the competition, right? Like they feel like they have to make their photos pop more because the competition, Samsung in particular, is been doing that. But at the same time, I also feel that Samsung has kind of gotten a little better over time. And then, of course, the whole Chinese gamut, which goes from excellent to really terrible, depending on who you're talking about. Sometimes on the same phone, even depending on what modes you're using. I'll be honest with you, I have kind of given up on that a little bit. I feel like I've stopped pixel peeping as much as I used to, simply because I want to just enjoy taking photos. And I find that I get really kind of cranky when I start pixel peeping. And I also feel like I shouldn't have to, like, if I want to tweak things, I'm going to pull out my my mirrorless, and then I can have all the fun I want, right? Or my Fujifilm point and shoot, which I love, right? Which is dials for everything, manual aperture, manual everything. That's kind of where I'm at right now. But I'm also feel like we should have the choice. And I think that's what like Apple has with ProRAW, right?
Yeah, and I think the question you just said is, when did Apple's photos by default start getting worse or more in your face, more popping out of screen?
Yeah.
And it happened when they introduced the Pro line, specifically, I think the 12 Pro Max was the first time I noticed it, because they could now say, okay, if you're a professional, you want to take an ultra natural shot, you've now got Pro RAW. But because they had giving people with all the 12 Pros, 13 Pros, 14 Pros, that option of Pro RAW, they felt free to go crazy with the defaults of just the basic app and normal users. And I think that's probably fair enough. I shoot 90% of my photographs this end in with Pro RAW on, and I've got a 1 terabyte phone. I didn't plan a 1 terabyte phone. I bought my iPhone secondhand. It just happened to come with a terabyte, but it's very freeing that I can shoot everything in Pro RAW and whatever the heck I want. And I know I'll never run out of space in the next decade. But it's, yeah, so I think when iPhones, they introduced the Pro iPhones, that's when they allowed themselves to go 110% on the default shots, I think.
Yeah, no, I feel that you're 100% correct. And I feel it's just getting harder. I want to talk to you a little bit later on when we start talking about the 1-inch sensors, about some of the other phones that have really, I think, been significant in the last year. What Vivo's been doing with the X series, what Oppo's done with the Find X6 Pro, what Xiaomi's done with the 13 series. I think those phones deserve a mention and deserve some praise for some things they're doing really well. And I hate to say it, as much as I love using my S23 Ultra for all my car photography, for my car coverage on Tech Radar, I love the flexibility of the lenses. It's not so much the quality, more like the choices I have in framing my shots, because cars are much harder to shoot than phones or devices that can be handheld. I tend to shoot my phones at 2x pretty much right now, at lossless, like fake lossless 2x, the cropped 2x on Pixel 7 Pro is currently. And of course, I've done it on iPhone as well. And 2x handheld, I get some beautiful shots with the larger sensors now, some natural depth of field. I don't have to use portrait mode like I used to on a 12 megapixel Pixel phone in the day. And so, I feel like car stuff, I need those zoom lenses, I need the telephotos, I need the ultra wide to be wider. And so that's why I use the Samsung phone. But conversely, when I do my own photography for my own memories and my own everyday, it's still Pixel. I still feel that Pixel still gives me, it's not perfect. There's a lot of enhancement and weirdness and things going on for sure. It's very computationally driven, and you can sometimes see that. But I am very satisfied day to day with those results, to the point where I'm shooting my product photography with the Pixel 7 Pro at 2x. And nobody complains. And in fact, I'm very happy with the results. So where are you in your mind's eye with the Pixel series? I haven't talked to you in about 3 years on the show, or 2 years. And so it's been a while since then they've introduced those high megapixel counts, pixel binning, all these things that didn't do before. And I feel it's gotten actually better.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I go there, just to mention that you're talking about the Google Pixel camera, to show how good that Pixel camera software is. I've got famous and loving the Surface Duo, which I'm sure you've seen and played. Mm-hmm. Love it to bits. It only's got one camera, selfie camera, and it's pretty rubbish. Really is. It's
you have the first generation model, right?
Yes. About 2009 style spec camera, but I run the Google Pixel camera, one of the various ports on it, and the results are pretty darn close to what I'm getting out of the iPhone and Sony. In good light, in fair enough, in good light, it can take really quite decent shots because of that Google Pixel software. Now, on the Pixels themselves, I've been so impressed the last year, I think, with the 7 Pro series in particular, where they've got the continuous zoom, where they're splicing in parts of the periscope detail into the center of the frame from the main sensor. So as you go to 2 times, the center of frame is showing you 2 times on the, maybe not 2 times, but 2.2, 2.3. As it goes beyond 2 times, it's showing you the center of the frame is actually results from the telephoto, and then it somehow auto-magically stitches everything together so you never notice. It's really, really clever. So I was massively impressed by the 7 Pro. I was heartbroken when Google PR decided they wanted it back after 6 months, but hey, so I'm currently without a Pixel. But hey, the 8 Pro is only round the corner.
That's right. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But I just feel like, honestly, for me right now, even the Pixel Fold, which has lesser sensors overall, this sensor fusion you're talking about is extremely well utilized on the Pixel Fold. If you can borrow one for a moment from somebody and try a few of your kind of like signature shots, the photos you take that tell you pretty much everything you need to know. There's always like a half dozen you can do as a photo expert there. For sure, you'll be like, oh yeah, I know what's going on. I am really impressed. It's not Pixel 7 Pro good, but it's still better than Pixel 6 Pro, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. And it's all this computational stuff that's going on. And I am very happy with what they're doing. Have you noticed, speaking of sensor fusion, Huawei was the first to do that, I think on the P30 Pro and then P40 Pro, P40 Pro Plus. And now it's being used by others. I think Honor's doing it on the Magic series, not as well, obviously, but there is a bunch of companies that are now doing sensor fusion. Are they doing it as well as Google? I don't think so, because Google still has a big leg ahead of everyone else there. But the interesting thing about the Pixel for me, I think, is that, with this 8 Pro coming up, are we going to see some improvements? Because the hardware looks to be the same again, roughly. And so there's a new chipset, Tensor G3. So will we see an improvement? I'm not sure that we even need to, but anything is welcome, right? Any improvement is welcome.
Yeah, I think we've got to the stage now in 2023 when almost leaving the foldables to one side, on standard candy bar smartphones, they're iterative in a very, very real way. They're not just 30% better, they're like 10% better. For a real world experience, and in terms of imaging, we're talking 10%, maybe 20% at most. And it's not worth spending another $1,000 or £1,000 for that. So in a very real way, I advise everyone, hang on to your smartphone for 2, maybe even 3 years, and then upgrade, and then you'll see the difference. The 7 Pro last year was so good, and the 8 Pro is merely going to be a refresh with better, faster internals, maybe a few extra apps, imaging applications, a few extra AI applications. Google love their AI. So I'm not that excited for the 8 Pro. I might, if you get a 7 Pro and I just imagine and update it with the latest Android version, I think you'll be 98% there.
I think you're right. And also, there are some little other details that we're going to talk about, like the flat screen, which obviously some people are excited about. But I think overall, I'm still gung-ho on Pixel. I still feel that if I have to shoot with a phone, that's the first one I'm going to pick. If I need versatility in lenses, I'm going to go from the S23 Ultra. And if I need, great video, iPhone every day, all day.
Yeah.
That's why I carry these. I carry specifically these 3 phones in my bag at all times with these specific applications. Of course, the Pixel is on me every day. It's not in the bag.
I envy you having the Fold. I'm assuming that's a PR Fold, and I still haven't got around to getting my PR unit.
I have a review unit from Google, and I've kind of made it my main phone for the time being, and just to kind of experience it a little bit. And I'm honestly pretty satisfied. Am I really using the folding features very much? I mean, first of all, I kind of like that Google has not followed in Samsung footsteps by giving us like this very kind of in-depth fold experience. Like for me, at most, I'm going to run 2 apps side by side. Mostly I like the inner screen for the extra real estate when I'm reading the web, reading an ebook, editing a photo in Google Photos. It's nice. But I find myself using the front screen a lot more, to be honest, for day to day, like triaging emails, dealing with conversations on various, messaging and social media platforms. But it's nice to have that versatility. The problem with the Pixel Fold for me so far has been it's heavy. It's not as, sleek as a Pixel 7 Pro in your pocket because of that. I think this new Honor Magic V2 that we've talked about on the show a few times now with a 9.9 millimeter thickness and 230 something grams of weight is kind of the right direction, because it basically is a bar phone when it's shut. And eventually everybody's going to get to that. And it's also, we have to keep in mind that the Fold from Google is a first-gen product for them. And for a first-gen product, it's very well sorted. And I have to say, I haven't played with all the Chinese book-style folding phones, but so far the Pixel Fold camera obliterates everyone else's camera. There's no contest whatsoever. And as a camera person, if I'm going to have a folding phone, this is the one. You know, I don't like the Tensor. It gets hot in my pocket all the time. Reception's not very good. It's the same as my Pixel 7 Pro. Honestly, it's a hassle for that.
Yeah, I would love to say, even without trying it in person, that the Pixel Fold, that Google has knocked it out of the park. The Tensor thing and the overheating is perhaps one of my biggest worries. I love the fact what they've done with the imaging. I love what they've done with the speakers, like the Surface Duo, having them diametrically opposite ends. So whichever way you've got it up, you've got stereo. Really clever. They've done great work on the screens and the hinge and the waterproofing. They've knocked it out of the park in so many ways. And I know you keep banging on about Tensor, but I'm starting to think you're right, and that would indeed be one of my biggest worries. If the damn thing kept getting warm in my pocket, I think I might start getting very annoyed.
Yeah, that's the only challenge. And then of course, I look at what the competition is doing in China, and then I'm excited, like thin and light, and then there's the software, and then there is the cameras. Are they going to live up to it? And then there is the wireless charging, which is not a big deal in the great scheme of things. But once you've lived with it for a while, like us, since the Nokia Lumia days, essentially, or before even, like you're so used to that. And, the fact that I had this conversation yesterday with Judy Stanford of Gear Diary. I write for them sometimes. It's a great little blog online. And, it's like we were talking about how, like the Pixel 7a, do you really need anything more than that in this day and age? That phone is so well sorted and so affordable. It's essentially a flagship for 500 quid. At least that's our price here. And when you look at what it delivers, yes, it's a scaled down experience in some ways, only 90 hertz. You don't get the better sensor of the Pixel 7 or 7 Pro, but it still takes incredibly good photos, and you get wireless charging. It's a metal frame. There is just no compromises. And when I see that, I say to the other phone makers, you have no excuse. You do not have any reason. Even the A series from Samsung doesn't get that good. And they're probably the ones with the most money who could pull it off. Of course, Apple has the SE3 now, but the camera system on that is just not competitive. The rest of it is great, but the camera system just doesn't, the fact that they don't have a night mode on that phone is silly. Like, I can understand their takeaway on this, that we're keeping it cheap, we're keeping it simple, we don't need multiple cameras. That could be argued with, but the no night mode, come on. Yeah, it's a software feature.
The acid test really is if someone was to take all of your phones away or burn in a fire and say, okay, Miriam, you're starting from scratch. You've only got $500.
Pixel 7a, that's
Pixel
it.
Pixel 7a and 100%. £500 every year, exactly the same. It's the one phone that will keep you going for, is it 4 years of updates, something like that? And
100%.
And they're going to be great feature updates. The imaging's top notch. The speakers aren't too bad. The wireless charging, you've got a great screen. You've got everything you need without having to pay the ridiculous prices, which even Sony, that well over £1,000 here in the UK for the Xperia 1 Mark V. You get so annoyed. The Xperia 5 Mark V, I don't know, are we going to come to that? That's also still a tiny bit too expensive.
Yeah, we just covered that last week. My biggest disappointment with that phone is that they removed the telephoto. At this price point, I feel that's unacceptable. Like, I didn't expect the variable optics on that. Just give us a 3x or 4x periscope,
But I will stick up for Sony here. A, they did reduce the price by $100 or £100, maybe more where you are, which is a significant drop from the RRP. And secondly, the telephotos on Sony's phones aren't actually that great. I know the 1 Mark V, I know this 3.5 to 5.2 variable zoom. You think, wow, this is going to be amazing. It's actually not.
It's not.
The results are pale. They're not contrasty. They're not as detailed as I want. They're not as precise as I want. And something's gone wrong, either in their image processing or in their optics. So 10 out of 10 for ambition for Sony. But I'm on the 5 Mark V. I'm very happy with just 2 times smart crop of the main sensor and a bit of intelligent software. I think 2 times is all most people will need for portrait shots and product shots or car shots or whatever. How many people buying a 5 Mark V actually want to do 3 times, 4 times, 5 times zooming? I do think most people would miss it.
Yeah, I know, I agree with you, but it's just an optic thing, right? Like, you come from the previous model, it's like, it's a bit weird. But I also agree with your take on the telephotos in general on the Xperia flagships. They haven't been that great, but I think it's the sensor. I don't think it's the optics as much. Like, I think a better sensor behind that lens system might actually deliver slightly better results. I think they're cheaping out a little bit there, and we can see it, right? Like, the main sensor is always being kind of the star of the show. And so this is a conversation I want to have, but will kind of segue us into the next subject, which is the 1-inch sensor subject. I have this theory, and I want your expertise on this, that I think phone manufacturers should switch to the main sensor being a 2x by default. I shoot at 2x way more than I used to. A lot of it because I'm doing product photography, portrait shots, and I find that 1x, especially on modern phone, has gotten too wide. And so what I'm thinking is, give us a good 48 or 50 megapixel ultra wide that starts at 120 degrees and allows us to shoot up to 1.8, 1.9x, like equivalent of today. That's a good quality sensor with autofocus, and then give us an OIS highly optimized, high quality sensor, shallow depth of field, 2x main sensor that can itself now go to 4x. And then we don't even need a telephoto, right? I think this is kind of something someone out there should explore. I feel that you could do it in such a way that you'd still be able to take equivalent to today 1x and have good results. What are your thoughts?
I applaud your optimism that messing around with focal lengths and framing. I think there would be too many compromises for the average user. By all means, they could make a Miriam Joie Tank Girl phone and do exactly that, and you'd be very happy. The majority of normobs, I call them, normal mobile users, they fire up the camera and they want to see as much as possible in their default main sensor camera view, because quite often they're pretty clueless, and they just getting it vaguely in the right direction is a good start. And to do that, you need a fairly wide frame for them to be able to, there's Auntie Maud on the left of the frame, and I haven't chopped Uncle Bert off the corner, all of that stuff. So I can see why the lenses have got the optics have got wider over time. I do agree with you that I use 2 times lossless on the iPhone, and on, if I had Pixel. If I had one, I use them an awful lot because I think they've done a really good job. 2x zoom on 3 or 4 years ago on a main sensor, it was almost always digital. And it was horrible. Even on the first quad bayers, zooming in by 2 times, then you'd have thought it would be like the old Lumis. It was nowhere near as good. But I think in the last year or so, with Sony and Apple and Samsung and Google, I think they've done a much, much better job. The Pixel 7, Pixel 6 series was terrible at doing a 2 times zoom, for example.
I agree, yeah.
But I think the manufacturers are nailing it. I think 2 times is perfectly usable. And you can't tell it's zoomed in with a smart crop with extra software tweaks. So I think they've done a good job. I'm standing up for what the manufacturers are doing, Miriam. I think keep things simple, keep the focal length the same, because not for you, but for the man in the street. And I can work around that by just going to 2 times most of the time.
Yeah, no, I respect that. I think that you make a good point, because we now have that quote unquote lossless 2x. And I think that came to the sensors. And it's kind of also why my rationale for, if we have lossless 2x on an ultra wide, we now get 1x lossless, right? See what I'm saying? Like, that's the idea. But I feel like you're right. And this 2x lossless, which also exists as 4x lossless on some phones now with 200 megapixel sensors, where they can crop one more time. So you get 16 by 1 pixel binning at, no zoom. And then you get 4:1 at 2x and no pixel binning at 4x. And of course, you lose in terms of low light performance, but you gain in terms of quality of zooming. And the way they're doing this is they're optimizing not just the sensors and the ISPs, but the whole entire chain of processing is designed for those modes. And that's how, that's why Apple made a big fuss about it when they launched it. And then we saw it appear on Google, and we now have it on Samsung, and we now have it on like even a phone like the Realme 11 Pro Plus, which is a $350 phone, mid-ranger, but has an incredibly good camera system, 200 megapixel OIS, and does that 2x and 4x lossless, and actually does deliver some really solid results for its price. So I think this is something we're going to see more and more, and we might see less telephotos because of that in that kind of like affordable flagship premium mid-range field, because we can now with a 200 megapixel sensor give us decent 4x zooming, at least in daylight.
Yeah, my biggest worry, if you like, with all of these smartphone cameras and zooming is that you get what I call the zoom gap. And you've said there that with a massive sensor, you can go to 4 times losslessly. But so many phones that they've come in with a periscope at 5 times or 6 times, and they've got a main sensor. But if you're zooming, which is pretty typical, say 3 times, 3.5 times, you're photographing the cat in the garden or the dog or whatever, you're not going in 6 times, because 6 times will be the whites of the cat's or dog's eyes. You're doing 3 or 4 times. But at 3 or 4 times, if you're not being very clever with either fusing the sensor information or doing some very, very clever interpolation, that 3 times, 4 times zoom would be far worse than if you actually shot with the zoom and then accepted the fact that you've got a much tighter frame, or just taken a 2 times shot and then manually cropped in later. And in managing that zoom gap is the really interesting thing. Sony kind of manage it with their 1 Mark V now with the 48 megapixel main sensor. I think Apple do a pretty good job. There is a bit of a zoom gap, sort of 2.5 times. I was very upset really that Apple changed from the 2.5 times zoom in the 12 Pro Max to the 3 times zoom, and because the portrait shots are just a tiny bit too tight now.
Yeah,
you have to step back to take a portrait, and I thought 2.5 times is just the perfect compromise for portrait and for just general real world use. You want to punch in a bit, 2.5 times. 3 times means that if you now zoom in at 2.5 times, it's all digital on the main sensor, and you've just got a tiny bit of fuzziness. So the zoom gap is something I'm still fighting against. I'm sure manufacturers will get there, and as ever, with the more processing they can throw at it, the faster the chipsets, the more intelligent things they can do, and they can fuse, and they can make up information, and things will get better. But that's the thing I've been fighting against for the last half a decade.
Yeah, and this is also the gap you see between like an affordable phone, like a mid-ranger that has like a bigger sensor and a bigger pixel count. Once you start zooming with those, you don't get any of the benefits of these algorithms, and it really falls apart. Whereas on flagships, you really are getting it. There are 3 things here that are contributing to making this better, continuously better. And the number one is, as you said, is sensor fusion. The second one is a better demosaicing algorithms, which have gotten really good, driven by AI, by machine learning models. And then the final one is the one Google still has the edge on and nobody else seems to be doing, which is super res zoom. The fact that it's using the hand motion and the OIS mechanism to kind of move the frame about a little bit in the multi-frame capture to extrapolate sub-pixel accuracy and get you more resolution.
Did we ever get to the mystery of why they didn't do that in the Pixel 6 Pro? Because it was completely missing on that phone.
I have no idea. We still don't know, remember? You discovered that, which was really amazing. Okay, let's talk 1-inch sensors because, Juan Carlos and I have had multiple shows together, and I do think he has a really good point here. And you kind of piggybacked on that. I'll put in your story here as well in the show notes. But I feel like I'm not quite as opposed to it because there's a certain aesthetic here that I like. And I think there's a solution. So let's have you explain your concern about those 1-inch sensors and why you're not as sold, and Juan Carlos himself is not as sold on that than say I am.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure whether he came up with his video first or I came up with an idea for my article first, but certainly around the same time. So I'm giving him full credit, and he did explain it all very well. And I've got a couple of extra points in my article. First of all, if you've got a really large sensor, so literally a 1-inch optical format sensor in a phone, that means you've got to have a large aperture. Everything scales up in terms of phone hardware. So if you've got a large sensor, you have a physically large aperture, not in terms of f-number, just physically larger, which means you then get a shallower depth of field. And we've had for example, some of the big Samsungs the last few years, trying to take sort of macro-ish shots of a flower 3-4 inches away, and all of a sudden part of the flower's in focus and the backs and the front of the flowers are blurred.
It's amazing,
because the depth of field is so incredibly shallow, which actually makes it very hard to take arty shots like the ones I sent you from the Sony Xperia early today, which I was very pleased with, by the way. Second reason, with a 1-inch sensor, again, everything scales up. The camera is physically too thick. The Z depth, or Z, as you say in America, or Z depth over here, you're physically talking about 12 millimeter, 13 millimeter start front to back in terms of the camera unit, and that's just insane. Phones are trying to get thinner, but if a 1-inch sensor has physical impact, physics here gets in the way in terms of Z depth. And finally, there is just too much light, and you think, well, that's crazy. How can you have too much light? But
I live in California. I know what you mean.
And this is the point I think I took from Juan Carlos Bagnell's video in particular, because I shoot most of my video on the iPhone. I never have to hit this problem. But if you have a 1-inch sensor and you're trying to shoot regular, normal video, all of a sudden you've got far too much light coming in for your 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second, so that every single shot, every single frame is taken in such a tiny splice of time, say at 1/5000th of a second, that the animation of the frames in your video at 30 or 60 FPS, you can see the flickering.
It's very choppy.
Yeah, but whereas if you've got a slower shutter speed, then there's a tiny amount of blur, natural blur, in this, say, 1/100th of a second of each frame, each shot within the video, at which point then you animate those, and it seems much smoother because you haven't been forced to take these incredibly fast shutter speeds of, say, a 5,000th of a second with this huge sensor. So I think there's a sweet spot. I think we go to something like what the Samsungs were using a year or so ago, what the iPhone currently uses, what the Sony uses. I think that's a perfectly
what the Pixel
sweet
uses
spot
as well.
Yeah. It is the sweet spot, and I think we should stay there and not go to 1-inch. There.
Well, I have another perspective, and I agree with you. That's the most cost-effective solution. But I have another solution, which is the kind of like the crazy photographer solution: variable aperture and an ND filter. But ND filter you don't need if you have variable aperture. And hear me out. Huawei, since the Mate 50 Pro, and then P60 Pro, and then the current Mate 60 Pro, which we're going to talk about for other reasons, is using a continuously variable aperture from f/1.4 to f/4. And I think that might solve the problem, to some extent. It'd be nice to have an ND filter on top of that, because on video, if you want that shallow depth of field and you're in a bright setting, you're still going to get that choppiness. Again, that adds Z depth or Z depth. It is certainly, but I'm just saying, if you're making a camera phone like the Xiaomi 13 Ultra, or like the Find X6 Pro from Oppo, or even this Sony phone, if they make an Xperia 1 Mark 6 next year with a 1-inch sensor, I think exploring this variable aperture idea is going to solve the problem. And ultimately, if this is the next logical step. We have variable aperture on cameras for a reason, right? So why not go there? If you can miniaturize it enough and gives us flexibility, I'm for it.
Yeah, well, you remember the Nokia N86, which had dual aperture back in 2008, I'm tempted to say, yeah. And we've seen a couple of Samsungs had it back in the S9 days.
Yeah, but they had small sensors comparatively, which is really weird. Yeah. And then the other thing is, remember the ND filters on some of the Nokias? Which one had that?
Nokia N8 had the ND filter.
The N8 had the ND.
Yeah. So the technology is all there, and you can only wonder, why do more manufacturers not try and put in a variable aperture especially on their flagships? Because if you're going for a flagship, you might as well put the R&D in. And I can only think it's just one stage too far in terms of complexity and fragility, and one more thing to break. The OIS is already, something that more or less copes with everyday life and movement and drops and whatever. But would a variable aperture mechanism, would that just not be a tiny bit too fragile?
I'm not sure that that's going to be an issue. I think it's more of a cost and a Z-depth issue at this point.
Okay. Yeah.
And if they can make a shallower stack of lenses, like 8 elements, but with like some more aspherical kind of like aspherical elements or whatever they're called, it's just more money. do we want to go there? I think the next generation, 2024, of these 1-inch sensor phones are going to have variable aperture. They have to. This is the next logical thing.
Is that a feature they can sell to consumers and put up on the bullet points though? Because I'm not sure most consumers would realize why they needed it.
No, but these are not the kind of phone people buy. These are flagship, camera-specific, photo enthusiast. Look at how Xiaomi is marketing the 13 Ultra. They have the 13 Pro with a 1-inch sensor. I have that one. I don't have the Ultra, and it's fine. But this Ultra just takes things to the next level. And honestly, they're marketing it as such. They have a leather case you can carry it in. Yeah. Like they have the grip you can add to it. Remember, like the 1020 grip. Like I love how Nokia's done all of this before everyone else.
Have you played at all with the snap grips? I'm showing on the video for your Patreon.
I have not, but I've heard of them. Oh, for iPhone, right? Was Maxi.
Yeah, you slap it on the back, and you've then got your iPhone turns into a DSLR with a shutter button. They're really clever gadgets. They also work with Android, by the way, because the shutter works by Bluetooth. So, this is about £70, $80, something like that.
And there's MagSafe cases for a certain Android phone now too. So I think that's going to work. Look, the reality is, I feel like we're gonna see this variable aperture. But I agree with you, for the average mainstream user, like the iPhone, the Samsung, the Google user, that sweet spot of 1/1.5, 1/1.3, 1/1.4 inch is going to be the sweet spot. And I think we could stay at that.
Can I just put forward an exciting thought? If we're going to variable apertures in flagships, which I accept, if they can just add an extra millimeter into the camera bump and get the Z-depth sorted out, they can do it. What if you then add artificial intelligence? Or you already get analysis of the scene. You're shooting a flower, a group of people, a ship, a car, or whatever. Then as it knows what you're shooting, it can also think, okay, look up table, Miriam's shooting a car, set the aperture to this, or Miriam's shooting a flower,
I think that will happen.
Set the aperture to this. So it will be part of the variable aperture could be entirely computer controlled, algorithm controlled. So even regular users won't need to think about it. They just know that their phone takes amazing photographs with just the right depth of field for the subject they're shooting.
I think that's absolutely going to happen. You're not going to be, you can't be stuck at f1.4 on a 1-inch sensor. Can you imagine the disaster on that? Like even at a meter away, you're going to have some focus issues on a face, right? So when you start shooting portraits, you're going to have issues. I think they're going to do it. And I'm excited about it simply because it's the next logical step. At this point, it's kind of almost the final frontier. We have good sensors, we have good glass, we don't have aperture.
Yeah, and you can imagine Sony taking delight of showing on the camera the the alpha-like DSLR-like interface on the Sony Xperia 1 Mark V. So I guess they would then add in aperture control there. But can you imagine having an aperture control on a standard smartphone camera app? No one would know what to do with it. It has to be automatic for most people. Yeah,
that would be a manual control only, and automatic somewhere. Otherwise, yes.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: you look at the Find X6 Pro, or even the recently announced the Oppo Find N3 Flip, the triple camera folding flip phone. They both have this knurled ring around the camera pod. Now make this a movable part that you can adjust whatever setting you want, aperture, shutter speed. Yeah. That would be really cool, right? And we've seen this before, like on rare cases, I think with maybe some third party like lenses like Moment and stuff. But what I want to see is that a wheel on these Sony phones. I want a wheel on one of the sides, maybe next to the shutter button. Like, remember the jog wheel on the early Sony Ericsson Symbian touchscreen phones?
UIQ devices,
Correct. So have something like that. Have it waterproof. That's the challenge. That's your challenge, Sony, because it needs to be water resistant. But I think this is where if we're going to go down this rabbit hole of making camera phones that are primarily destined to be used by photo enthusiasts, like the Sony, like the Oppo, like the Xiaomi, we need to get serious and start doing this. Like, miniaturization is endless. Like, if you grab a Pixel 7 Pro or 6 Pro, shake it when it's turned off, when the camera is not running. And you will literally hear the OIS just loosely, like the lens is just rattling in there. It's designed for that because, it's just relaxed. So it's just going to move with whatever motion. As soon as you fire up the camera and you put it on, the OIS kicks in, shake it, and you won't hear anything. And my point is,
I was looking for my Lumia 1020 in the drawer there, because the 1020 from Nokia actually came with a sticker or a little piece of card in the box saying, if you hear rattling, that's the OIS and the ball bearings at work. It literally came with a card that told you that.
And so, I think this variable aperture is going to be the same. To shockproof it, they're going to make it loose when it's not running. So it can go in any which way. And the only limits in terms of G-forces are going to be the extremes, right? And for that, they can beef up the engineering so that the detents for that are strong enough to cope with the weight of a 10G drop, right? But when it's running is the only time where the leaves are going to kind of freeze into place to be at the right aperture. You don't want to waste energy on springs or anything that keeps things in place. It's all driven by these tiny linear, essentially solenoids that are the same thing as VU meters, right? It's just tiny stuff. And as soon as you excite those motors with a current, it's going to stay exactly where it needs to be, depending on how much current you apply. And so as soon as you loosen that, the thing can just be loosey-goosey. It doesn't matter. And that's what we're seeing with the OIS now. And I wouldn't be surprised if on the Xperia, they have a similar thing for the zoom lens, the periscope, because you don't want to force something in place. That means springs, things that can break, you don't do that.
Yeah.
The lighter,
of course,
the better, too.
Adding all this wonderful technology and hardware, in addition to making it thicker, will also add another $100 or £100 on.
Of course, price. but who's counting at this point? This is a niche product, and I'm not saying that, right? I understand your concern. That's why you buy a Pixel 7a, okay? You want good photography, you want the best of all of the worlds, of the compromise if you want, do that. But I think that if we're going to go down this rabbit hole that we've been going down of making $1,500 US phones that are camera phones that don't even have a folding screen, I'm on that. I'm on board. But just let's go nuts. Let's go all out. Let's just I think niche phones is the future. The phone has been so commodified. We need niche products, and they're going to cost money.
There will be a Miriam Joie phone out one day for you, and a
Marquez
Steve Litchfield phone
Marquez will be the first. Marquez will be the first. Mark my words. He's the only one who can do it. All right, let's talk about some quick news items, bullet point through them real quick. The first one is a very interesting illustration, which I don't know if it's real or not, of what the iPhone 15 Ultra, I guess, Pro Max, whatever it's going to be called, is going to have as a periscope lens. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think it looks justifiable. I still think there will be a zoom gap if Apple doesn't pull the same trick as Google. I'm hoping that if Apple does the same as Google and fuses, as I say, information from this potential leaked periscope, which I think was rumored to be 4 times, which is sensible. It doesn't try and go crazy. So taking a 4 times information, splicing it into the main camera's as is and slightly zoomed output, I think they could get very good results. I was a bit worried when I heard about a periscope on an iPhone with only 3 cameras rather than 4. But 4, I think, would have pushed the prices way too high. And a 4 times periscope just seems like a natural progression from the 3 times. With a bit of clever software, they can make it work and not have too much of a gap. So I think this looks real.
Yeah, me too. So this leak, I'll put a link to it. It's a GSM Arena story. I think the source was some kind of Twitter leak. And basically we have the specs, f-stops, and sensor sizes and megapixel counts for all the different, and even sensor specifics like Sony IMX803, for example, for the main sensor on these, on all the different cameras for the iPhone 15 lineup, which is really exciting. I think I didn't think that stuff would leak, so I'm looking forward to it. I mean, the telephoto with a periscope, I think, honestly, this is interesting you bring up 4X, because I feel that 5X on the Fold and the 7 Pro, the Pixel phones, is too much. The 4X on the 6 Pro was just a sweet spot. I find myself wanting to shoot at 4X more than 5X. And then, of course, I've got the zoom gap, right, to deal with on my new Pixels. Yeah. So that's interesting you bring that up. The next little bit is related to Pixel. We have actually, since then, Google's gone out and actually published videos showing the 360 view of their actual phones, both the 8 Pro and the 8. But when I gave you these show notes, we had a leak of what the Pixel would look like, the 8 Pro in the simulator, which I think was kind of a omission on Google's part. They put it live out there without noticing, and people discovered it. But basically, it shows you what's important here is that it shows you the sizes of the phone and the different sides and what it looks like. You can clearly see the flat screen. You can clearly see how it's got these rounded corners, much more iPhone-like, which I'm a bit bummed about. I like the squareness of the Pixel Pro versus the more rounded Pixel non-Pro. And also, you know, I don't know, it's too iPhone-like in like outline. I'm not saying, of course, the visor really makes a difference in terms of like placing it as a Pixel, but everybody's going to this kind of iPhone-like, very rounded rectangle thing. And I like the squareness. I want something a little more rectangular, like more edgy. Just me.
Yeah, I don't think it was just Apple that went rounded corners. I'm sure I think there were other manufacturers that put it into their Android phones at either the similar time or first. But it's very much a personal choice. To be honest, you give me a Samsung or a Sony or an iPhone, and within a day or so, I've gotten used to it. I don't actually care whether it's got a flat screen or curved screen edges. Again, it feels different for a day or two, then I get used to it. What matters to me is the performance, the speakers, the screen, the cameras, all of the things that actually matter. I'm intrigued by these diagrams of the Pixel 8 Pro. What are all these sensors? Because the diagram I'm looking at has got lots of yellow dots. So obviously 3 are the main cameras, but
one is a temperature
one will be an
sensor.
LED. What does a temperature sensor do?
Yeah, apparently you'll be able to point it at somebody's face and get their temperature readout, like a laser thermometer or maybe even a thermal camera. It might be a thermal camera.
So like COVID, you'd use it as a COVID type thing. Yeah. Okay. And the others are just the LED flash?
Yes. Or maybe some spectrum sensor within the LED flash, spectral sensor for color accuracy. What's also interesting, and it's not in this link, but as I said, Google just spilled all the beans with some videos. I'll put a separate link in the show notes for this. But we now have a clear size comparison between the 8 Pro and the 8 side by side, and the 8 is significantly smaller. And we know that the 8 Pro is retaining a 6.7-inch display, which is very exciting news for those who like small phones, because it means the Pixel 8 will be just barely bigger than 7a. So that's interesting to me because, you know, I'm a big fan of small phones. I know that there's a lot of people out there who are too. Myself, I'm a daily driver. I'm okay with big size because I want more features and functionality, especially camera functionality. But I totally understand and support those of you who are like, no, I like the Asus Zenfone 10. I like the Xperia 5 Mark V. That's absolutely right. And this is going to be another phone that makes no compromises. Pixel 8. Right. Yeah,
one of my favorite Pixels with a huge Achilles heel. One of my favorite Pixels ever was the Pixel 5. The feel in the hand, the size, it was just like, this is the perfect smartphone, fits in any pocket for any use. Amazing camera for its time. Its Achilles heel was the fact they had this weird piezo top speaker earpiece, so you couldn't actually play media properly on it. And that completely nixed it for me. But apart from that, the Pixel 5 was stunning in terms of the compact form factor, and so many people love that phone. So if this gets even halfway close to feeling like a Pixel 5, the Pixel 8, then I think it will do very well.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot not be excited about Pixel. It's my jam, right? So this is the phone I would pick. All right, next thing up, we mentioned this 2 or 3 weeks ago as a rumor, but it's actually came out while I was at IFA last week and completely forgot to put it in my IFA roundup. It wasn't announced at IFA, but it was announced that week, and we split the podcast last week in all the IFA news and followed by all the other news, and it should have been in the other news. It's that the Realme GT5, which is their flagship, is being announced in China. We have pricing, we have details. As we expected, 240-watt version. There's also a 150-watt version that has a slightly bigger battery, of course, and it has up to 24 gigs of RAM, like a lot of the latest Oppo flagships. And you're shaking your head, but actually I talked to a developer about this, and they told me that it is not really necessary. Obviously, we all know that. But apparently it makes a difference in terms of smoothness and multitasking because Android is such a crappy OS. Like in a nutshell is what they said. They're like, if you are a power user and you're totally jumping between apps all the time, these apps can all be running simultaneously with 24 gigs of RAM. And that's why we're starting to see in China these phones with 24 gigs of RAM coming out of primarily the BBK group. So there you go. So,
but I contend that on devices with 8 gig of RAM, which is very, very common now in the Android world, you can still have 10, 15, 20 apps all running in RAM simultaneously. How many apps do you... I mean, back in the Symbian days, Symbian was insanely good. We used to... Retail Courier, I'm sure you've met. She once did a test and got up to 58 applications running simultaneously on the same Nokia N95 because of just how efficient it was. But who in this world needs to have 50-odd applications? Here, 24 gigabytes of RAM. That's maybe enough for 50 Android apps at the same time.
Running at the same time, but switching smoothly and not... Startup times are pretty much instantaneous because they're basically in a RAM disk at this point and stuff like that. I think that's what it is. Like, because there's a lot of caching going on. A lot of these phones that use more than 12 gigs of RAM, especially BBK group phones, basically cache all the apps. Like in RAM, like they're ready to run. They're not being started from the flash memory. They're being started from RAM. And that, that makes a difference. Like, I think that, like, I don't personally care, but I can understand also bragging rights, and then it's probably not a very expensive thing to add comparatively to like a better camera or a better display,
And here I am saying all this and I've got a 1 terabyte iPhone, which is just clearly equally as crazy.
It's ridiculous, but at the same time, I think there's a bit better argument to be had on your side there, Steve.
The 240 watt charging there, that is insane.
The next thing is the charging speed. I have the GT3, which had 240 watt. And to give you an example, right, at 0% fully discharged, you plug it in, and I would go take a shower, and I would come out of the shower, it'd be fully charged. And we're talking, my shower was longer than 9 minutes. That's how long it took. It's crazy. And the phone doesn't even get warm. That's the other thing that blew my mind. Yeah. Like, how do they do that? And clearly this is, where we're going. I don't think that, it'd be nice if, like, right now I kind of feel like everybody expects 67 watt is kind of the sweet spot. If you have that, you're solid. Like that's like contemporary modern spec. 33 is a little on the slow side now, but anything more than 66 is 67 is too much. But maybe not. Maybe we're going to a place where 150 watt will be the standard or something, right?
But how do they do it? I understand how you get to 60, 70, 80 watts and you have dual battery circuits using unused pins in the USB Type-C connector to have two battery charging circuits into 2 batteries internally. Okay, that way you can double the power, but how the dickens do they get to 240 watts? Have they literally got 4 battery charging circuits all in
So it's a different
parallel?
Battery chemistry, silicon carbide or whatever, I can't remember what it's called, new anodes, and this is basically straight out of EV car tech. They're using a lot of the progress we've made in electric cars and applying it to phones, and that's how they can get these incredibly fast charging speeds at a lower risk of thermal runaway. And why not? Like, it costs more on the battery side, costs a little more on the charger circuit side. But most of the most of the heavy lifting electrically, current and voltage stuff is in the charger anyway on these systems. Like the phone, you want to keep the phone cool. And it's not the battery. I mean, part of it is the battery getting warm, but with these chemical formulation, it's not the battery you have to worry about. It's all the electronics that are needed to do the charging. So if you take those out of the phone and put them in the charging brick, then you're solving the problem. I still think it's fascinating.
And by the battery not on the whole phone not getting too warm as well, you haven't got the fact that lithium-ion batteries or silicon carbide here, they degrade. Obviously, they degrade faster when they're warmer. And every day I put my phone down on a Qi charger, and I love the convenience. And I almost never plug my phone in. But they get warmer, and bit by bit, I see my battery health, or whatever Google calls it, it's decreasing. And the number of phones over the last 5 or 6 years, I've had to get the battery changed because I have literally worn the battery down because the phone is always getting quite hot because it's always wirelessly charging. I still prefer the convenience, but that heat is an issue. So if they've solved the heat issue with these really fast charging systems, then the batteries won't degrade, and we're there.
Yeah, and it's also why I complain about the heat generated by Tensor. It's not good for the battery. It's not good for the phone. Like, it's not just inconvenient and unpleasant to hold. It's just not good for the phone. And so, the other thing to keep in mind is battery preconditioning is becoming a thing on these phones. So what I mean by that is something that we've seen on electric cars for years now. As you take your Tesla to a charging location using their built-in navigation, it will preheat the battery to be at the right temperature for the charging to be as fast as possible. This GT5 and the previous GT3 have that functionality if you charge them in cold climates. So if you are plugging them in, like you pick them up from the ice that were outside in the ice bank, in the snow bank, and you pick them up and you plug them in, they're not going to charge at 240 watt. What they're going to do is warm the battery up very gently to room temperature or to the right, I think something like in the 20s of degrees. Basically, think of lithium-ion batteries as they want to be the same temperature as a human. So whatever our temperature is roughly the best charging speed temperature. Once it gets to that speed, then it starts charging the battery. So you get a little like 5-minute preheat area. And that's kind of magical. The fact that we have this technology in phones now, like that, and the way they're doing it, this is the crazy thing. They're cranking up the GPU and the CPU on the phone. They're actually making it run some kind of math in the background to just kind of heat it up so that it heats up the battery, and in turn the battery warms up, and then when it reaches a certain temperature, which is a safe temperature, they can start ramping up the charging speed. Amazing. Like, any nerd out there would be with me on this one. It's crazy.
Add an extra level of nerdiness, have that warming up the GPU and CPU, cranking through some cryptocurrency, and you can make money while your battery's warming.
That's right. Oh, don't give the Chinese any ideas.
No.
All right. I've got a few more things here. Infinix Zero 35G is official. There were rumors the last 2 weeks or so. This is the Infinix flagship for the year, and I have one, and I haven't played with it yet. I'm about to set it up. So give you some idea, there's a 108 megapixel ISOCELL HM6. That's one of the smaller pixel size sensors from Samsung with 108 megapixels, but it has OIS, which is pretty exciting. The rest of it's pretty generic. A Dimensity 8T20. It's got, a nice OLED 120 hertz display. And, this is a phone that costs like $400 or something. It looks sexy, and I like what I'm seeing here. I'll let you know a little more once. It's actually less than that. It's $340 US roughly. So pretty cool, right?
There's so many of these minor brand name Android phones being launched. I kind of lose count. Every day I wake up and there's news of another one. But my biggest concern, I'm sure they're perfectly fine, but unless the company concerned has a commitment to updates, and updates have become... They don't. You're going to buy this and it's going to be out of updates within a year or so. And when we've got Samsung, which is really knocking it out of the park, Google could do better, but it's getting better. Apple is phenomenal. Fairphone are unbelievable. You've got all these companies doing some amazing things in terms of supporting their phones for longer. It may not be in your use. You might have passed it on to a friend or family member, but it's going to be helping someone down the line. But to have these Chinese phones that come out with top specs, no waterproofing quite often, and the updates run out after a year, I would just say, buy with caution.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The software is always the issue on these, but it does have some cool things. A 50 megapixel front facing camera, which looks like it has a very good sensor too. I mean, ISOCELL JN1.
Yeah, the Infinix is IP53 according to the specs, which I don't think is, it's okay for $400, I guess, but IP53 is not really very much. And the average person buying this will be the sort of person who would dunk it in the washing up bowl or use it in the rain. And then, of course, it would pack up.
Yeah, I think that's a minor issue. I think IP53 is going to serve most average users well. Unless you dunk it in the tub, I think you're okay with splashing, rain.
All right. Has got eco leather back.
Yeah, well, as I said, there's some aesthetic parts here that are very pleasing. And overall, the price is right. But the software updates is a good segue towards the next topic, actually, because, I didn't mention it earlier, but the Xiaomi 13T series is going to be announced on September 26th. And together with the news that they're going to be launching the next flagships, the second half of the year flagships from Xiaomi, so maybe an 1-inch sensor camera phone here again. But alongside that, they've announced that they're committing to the same software update policy as Samsung. This is Xiaomi. That's huge news, at least on the flagships, which I think is really a good start, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been seeing this trend over the last half decade, and I'm glad we're finally there now that serious brands with serious flagships, serious phones are getting serious support and not being dropped. I think Google is the one that was playing catch up here, but and Xiaomi is now overtaking Google almost.
It's kind of crazy, isn't it? But look, I'm sure Google will eventually catch up. It's a good competition to see, because for so long we were complaining about that as reviewers. Like, you buy this phone, like this Infinix, and then what? Then what? Nothing.
Yeah,
you get no updates, nothing, right? So the last couple of things I want to talk about are, we touched on this last week when we talked about the Mate 60 Pro existing and this kind of surprise, kind of quiet announcement, and how it had a chipset in there, Kirin 9000S, that was an in-house chipset, but we didn't know too much about it. And it had 5G, and it's like very surprising considering the sanctions that the US has put on Huawei and on China in general, the fact that they cannot really make chips that are competitive with the West. But that seems to not be the case. What seems to be the case here is there's a Bloomberg report. It's a paywall, so I actually put the Guardian's version of that. They talked to Reuters, and Reuters worked with Bloomberg on this story. So you're getting the free version on this link I'll put in. But basically the takeaway is, this is a 7 nanometer chip, so it's about 4 years old in terms of chip technology, but performance-wise, it's probably close to a Snapdragon 888. And that was unexpected. The people who put these sanctions on didn't think that China was going to be able to get to this level of chip fabrication in-house, internally, and they were sadly mistaken, because here we are. Now, can they produce them in large quantities? We don't know. But, I've always thought these sanctions were stupid. At least on the consumer end, like I can understand the national security concerns around the networking equipment, even if though I think it's a little excessive, but I can understand that. But I never understood why the terminals, like the devices that we all enjoy, have to be sanctioned. And this is just a kind of like a big middle finger to the U.S. sanctions by saying, hey, you put a lot of pressure on a bunch of engineers for a couple of years, and, a lot of money which the Chinese government is throwing at this. And look at what we can do. It's not 5 nanometers or the 3 nanometers that MediaTek just announced that they have 3 nanometer fabrication today. This is in the news, using their TSMC process, and they are actually doing some test runs of Dimensity 9200 chips with 3 nanometer to see how much better it is. So it's not there yet, but look, they're not that far behind. And if they spend 2 more years and billions more Chinese yuans doing this, I think they might catch up. And then what? Right?
Yeah. I felt so sorry for Huawei when Trump and his administration issued these sanctions, and we got a huge Huawei headquarters quite near my house. It's about a mile or two down the road. I've been there several times. I've met the people there. We've been in there for product launches, and they just shared the building with Honor, of course, back in the day. And then since then, Huawei has just been hit worldwide. And I know they're still selling phones in China, but I was glad the P40 Pro, was it the P40 Pro Plus? One of them. It was the highest end. Yeah, highest end imaging phone they had, but no Google mobile services. And I had fun as a geek playing around with extra app stores, but it was a complete and utter nightmare and a complete no-go outside of China, back in the Western world. So I feel really sorry for Huawei. I wish the sanctions could be lifted for consumer phones. Is it too late for Huawei? Hopefully not. But at the moment,
this is not going to improve relations. And I think that's unfortunate. But I think at the same time, I am glad that, they are able to show that, hey, whatever you do to us, we're just going to, it just shows you the futility of it. Like, I kind of understand where, this is coming from, but this is not the way forward. Like, we cannot, as a human species, evolve if we keep doing this kind of geopolitical BS. And that's my opinion. And you know what? Yes, I value privacy. Yes, I value, copyright. And to some extent, I have some issues with copyright. But I do feel like, the consumer products that Huawei makes, there was no reason. There was no reason to ban that. What difference does it make? So anyway, there you go.
Completely agree. Yeah.
The last thing I want to quickly talk about, again, I should have mentioned last week on the IFA part of the podcast, was the Lenovo Legion Go. Now, I'm not I used to work in video games, but I was never a gamer. I worked in video games because I love the technology and I developed a lot of engine-based technology for games. But this is interesting because it's another one of those, handheld gaming machines that Windows-based, that's modular, has like removable controls on the sides, kind of like the Nintendo Switch, and but it's PC based, it's Windows based, and it's by the Legion brand from Lenovo, which is their gaming brand. And I took some photos. This is an hardware article I'm linking to. I write for them. I do their phone reviews. I was there and they said, "Oh, can you take photos for us? We want this for our news article." So you'll see all the pretty photos there I took with my Pixel 7 Pro at 2x. And it's interesting. It's kind of chunky, but it's got some interesting specs, and more importantly, these removable controllers that are, one can be adapted and turned into a vertical mouse with a little puck that it kind of magnetically latches onto, so you can use it that way. I thought it was cool. And I'm all for, handheld gaming evolving beyond the mobile phone, but also scaling down beyond the gaming laptop into something in the in-between land. How do you feel about that stuff?
Yeah, it looks like a decent bit of KISS. This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, and this is well, I guess it's mobile because you can take it with you.
Even
though
you
can't,
right?
Yeah, I guess you can take it with you.
Mobile gaming, yeah, it's got batteries.
Yeah, but it's running Windows 11. I mean, I know we're looking at high-end games here, but I'm a big fan of casual gaming, by which I mean playing sports simulations and flight sims and retro arcade games and Angry Birds, that sort of thing. Playing an intense gaming session of 2-3 hours with headphones, presumably, maybe you're on a train somewhere doing something really intense, and you got your buddies talking in your ear while you play the games. It seems like something that should be admirable and really exciting. I just can't see it necessarily working in the real world for those intense PC/console games.
So if you scroll down on the same article, there's the Lenovo Legion glasses, $329, which are HDMI stereo glasses with OLED displays in them. And so this is your screen on the go. You plug that into your Legion Go, and you've got some interesting gaming solution. There you go.
I'm afraid I'm very much get off my lawn, yes. Mr. Old Grumpy Man, with all these glasses and Apple Vision Pro, and oh my goodness me, just don't get me started. It'll never take off. You mark my words.
No, look, I'm with you. I'm with you. This is ridiculous. But I just wanted to point out that you can spend more money.
Of course you can. Yeah.
All right, let's wrap it up. Steve, do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet? Your social media handles, things have changed a little bit in social media since, so maybe you can upgrade us on that. And of course, where can be found, your podcast, your personal site.
Yeah, the best thing is just go to myname.com. So Steve Litchfield. Litchfield has got a T in it. It's LITCHFIELD. And that's got links to everything I do. In terms of socials, I'm really been disappointed by what's happened to Twitter/X. And there's a little site on that line called mewe.com, MEWE.com. Have you heard of that, Miriam?
I have not.
It's basically a privacy-centric version of Facebook, in the sense that you have communities on MeWe and topics, and you can close them down. So, for example, we have a phone show chat, my audio podcast, a PSC community there, and people have to apply to enter it. And once they've answered the appropriate questions, we know they're genuine and not some spammer, we let them in. And it's like the BBSs or the CompuServe forums of old. And you have sensible conversations and real feedback and real discussions, and not just spending your entire time scrolling past adverts or scrolling past trollers. So yeah, MeWe.com, we have a wonderful PSC community there. So that's the main place I can be found. But SteveLitchfield.com has all the links of stuff, and I link out to things from there, including my blog, and I still do some writing, even though I am, as you say, semi-retired.
And the podcast. Your podcast is awesome. So absolutely go listen to the podcast, and I'll put the links in the show notes. You know where to find me, folks. I'm at TankGirl, TNKGRL, on most social media. I'm still on X/Twitter, for better or for worse. I still have some engagement then. Thankfully, my timeline isn't too corrupt by bad elements. Keep my fingers crossed, but I am not too happy with what's going on there right now. You can find me also on Instagram, on Threads, on Blue Sky with the same handle. Of course, Facebook as well, although I use that mostly for family and friends. So if you want to see pretty pictures of phones, of cars, of travel, of food, go to my Instagram, all shot with phones, sometimes some reels as well. Yesterday, I took a Waymo car, self-driving car, with no driver in the car for the first time here in San Francisco. So I'm going to put up a reel. Check it out. The podcast lives at mobiletechpodcast.com. We're on all the big platforms, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, Amazon, everywhere good podcasts can be found. There's a YouTube channel, youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast. You can get some unboxing videos and some other content there related to the show. You know how YouTube works. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, click the bell, comment, all that good stuff. Of course, there's a Patreon. We mentioned that earlier. If you want to help me out financially, you can get a video version of this podcast. You get it ahead of time, a couple of days before the audio public version. And, you get to see us doing stuff on video, like waving and holding up phones and whatever fancy drink we're having right now, which I think is just water for you and usually coffee for me. But the bottom line is it's a little more personal, kind of like, you feel like you're part of the thing. So check it out. There's also other perks at the Patreon. So patreon.com/tankgirl. That's patreon.com/TNKGRL. And if you can help me, I'd appreciate it. If you'd rather do another way to help, there's a PayPal link in the show notes. Buy me a coffee or something. Do that instead. I'd appreciate it. And I want to thank our sponsor, Mint Mobile. You know I review a lot of phones, so I'm constantly juggling multiple devices. While that's fun, it also means I'm spending a lot of money for wireless service on multiple SIMs. Thankfully, there's Mint Mobile, and that's who I'm teaming up with for today's podcast. If you want to save money on your wireless service, switch to Mint Mobile. You've probably seen the Mint Mobile ads featuring Ryan Reynolds, but let me quickly tell you how fantastic their service is, especially for tech-savvy early adopters like us. Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for as low as $15 a month, and you don't have to sacrifice any coverage, speed, or data. They're built on the nation's largest 5G network. They keep costs low because they sell direct to you online. They cut out the retail stores and salespeople. Why should you pay more than you have to for access to the same network? In my experience testing phones, Mint Mobile delivers the same data speeds and call quality as the big three for a fraction of the cost. Switching to Mint is super easy. Thanks to their eSIMs, you can sign up and activate immediately right on your phone from the comfort of your home. No more standing around waiting in line at a big wireless store. You can keep your current devices and phone number and easily switch services. And if your phone isn't eSIM compatible, Mint will ship you a new SIM card free of charge. The whole process only takes 15 minutes, and if you get stuck, Mint has a great customer service team to get you through it. All Mint Mobile plans include unlimited nationwide talk and text, plus lightning-fast 5G and free mobile hotspot. Mint will show you how much data you use each month and recommend plans that save you money. Mint also offers a modern family plan that lets you set up a super affordable family plan with as little as 2 lines. Use my link, mintmobile.com/mobiletech, to get premium wireless starting at $15 a month. Stop paying more than you need on your wireless bill and start saving big with Mint Mobile. And I want to thank you, Steve, for being my guest. Thanks so much for coming back on the show and nerding out about cameras with me.
It seems like it's an annual thing, maybe biannual sometimes, but it's great to catch up, Miriam.
Absolutely. We'll have you on again at some point in the future. And folks, I have another show next week, so stay tuned for that. Until then, cheers, everybody.
Bye.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.